Hi, I'm Defne Eskiolu, and today with the Community Web TV for the Youth program, we'll be discussing the Istanbul Convention with Şenay. So I have a few questions to start off. Could you just firstly tell us what the Istanbul Convention is, please?
Yes, of course. So what the Istanbul Convention is, it was created on preventing and combating violence against women and girls, predominantly domestic abuse. So it was signed. It's signed by about 45 countries, and most of which have ratified it as well. And when you look at it, it's very, very, to put it in a very simple, understandable way, it allows this treaty allows women to kind of have their own human rights, and that to be then practiced by the government. It requires governments who have signed and ratified to follow certain rules of this treaty and fulfill those rules given in the treaty. So it's a very, very comprehensive legal framework. So it sets a legal framework as well, since it's a treaty that these countries have signed for. So it kind of sets the bare minimums for countries to adhere to in combating domestic abuse and violence against women and girls in general. Some of the key areas which it requires is for governments to prevent violence against women and girls through the recognition that it's a result of a gender-based violence and a gender inequalities, meaning namely men and women. So it kind of combats against the gender inequality towards women. And it provides, those governments should provide support and protection services for the victims of domestic violence, and effectively to then prosecute and rehabilitate those perpetrators, and to cooperate with other countries, because it's everyone's business. So as we all say everywhere, domestic violence is everyone's business. So there needs to be a global cooperation and combat against this. So you can't just educate one, because we're mobile, we're dynamic beings, where we could be like ourselves. We come from Turkey, most of us, but then we bring a lot of things with us. So it's that movement to be able to then monitor that globally, basically, because violence against women and girls happens in every country. It doesn't have a discrimination on what country you're from, what language you speak, what religion you're from. You know, it doesn't discriminate your class, race, color, whatever, you know. It happens in all communities, in all nations. So hence it needs a global combat against it. So some of the things in how would that then translate, those things I've listed, how would that then translate in practicality? Some of the things, for instance, the convention requires the governments to do is to provide healthy relationships, education, so people are aware what a healthy relationship should look like, and what are the signals and indicators of violence and abusive behavior. So it's a behavior issue. Its cause is power and control. It's gender based. So it's about educating both men and women. And this healthy relationships actually focus more on the younger generation. So they start off with, from the onset, they know what a healthy relationship actually should be like, rather than given the social normatives we're being taught through our day-to-day lives. And to provide victims with access to support services, with security, safety services, such as like a refuge for them to then flee, or and other things like legal advice, counselling. So there are loads of intersectional issues when someone is subject to domestic abuse. It's not just that they are subject to domestic abuse on its own, and that's the only issue they come with. They would need therapy for, counseling, because it has a huge impact on victims' mental health. And it needs legal advice, because there are sometimes immigration problems in there, financial advice. And so all this holistic wraparound services, you can't just tackle domestic violence on its own unless you put everything else in place as well. So the core of the convention kind of addresses that. And it's also to actually conduct awareness raising campaigns on regular basis and provide trainings for professionals as well. So when professionals are dealing with these cases or dealing with victims, they have a appropriate approach. They have an informed approach as to what the needs are, and not to re-victimize the victims by, for instance, not believing them, etc. So it's a whole overarching thing. And then it also to actually criminalize all forms of violence towards women, including stalking, including forced marriage, including female genital mutilation, forced abortion, and loads of other, all these things comes under violence against women and girls, should be criminalized, and that the perpetrators should be held to account, and there shouldn't be immunity for them, impunity for them to walk away with reduced sentences or not even being sentenced. Sometimes the cases drop, and etc. And also to ensure that unwanted verbal or non-verbal, physical or sexual conduct with purpose to violate, to violate a dignity of a person is also kind of tackled and prevented in this case. The violation of the women's dignity and rights, and to put legal sanctions in place, to put a legal framework in place so people just don't get away with what they do, and they are held to account. So by signing this convention, the governments initially agreed to adhere, that they won't implement anything that will conflict with the asks of this convention. But to ratify it, it means they will proactively take steps to put things in place to then fulfill this treaty. Hence, they will be held accountable by the international human rights law and etc. So that's where the difference between signing and ratification of the treaty comes. So you will be held accountable if you ratified it. And there has been, like I said, there has been numerous, there's around 34 countries that ratified it, and Turkey being the first one to ratify and now first one to withdraw.
Unfortunately.
Well, when we look at it historically, it came into force. So this convention happened in 2011. It took place in Turkey, hence it's called the Istanbul Convention. So conventions usually take the place of the city. They usually take these kind of treaties when they come about. They take the name of the city they were held in. And so it was created in 2011, and then a lot of countries started signing up to it since 2012, UK being one of them. So UK did sign up to it in 2012. And
where does that, so now with Istanbul, Turkey leaving the convention and signing up, where does that place the UK and other countries to do with the convention? What does it mean for the future of other countries?
Well, the thing is, because this was initially created for the global combat. So for a country, unfortunately, who hasn't even implemented the thing, they haven't even fully implemented. So since 2014, when it came into force, the Istanbul Convention, since then, we haven't even seen much doings, compliance with it from Turkey anyhow. And now they want to totally come out of it without even having any reasons for it. And the only excuse that was kind of mentioned was that it destroys the family values in Turkey and it promotes homosexuality. So this is how narrow and ignorant it is interpreted by this country who first signed and first ratified this convention, and since haven't implemented it to start with, to withdraw. But what it means for the bigger picture is there are countries, so for instance, Bulgaria, I think it was 2018, when it was taken to their parliament, because they have signed it. So it was taken to their parliament by one of the parties to ratify it and to do something about it. And Bulgaria, with very similar, very, very conservative reasonings, they refused to ratify this convention because they believed it didn't suit their Bulgarian way of living. So when you look at it, it's a global thing. It's very simple. You stop the gender-based violence, you stop violence against women and girls, you educate your people, you make perpetrators accountable, and you create healthy relationships, education environments, so the younger generations grow with this knowledge. This is a universal thing. It doesn't conflict with any country's family values, or it definitely does not promote homosexuality or anything. So Bulgaria, for instance, said it will then come to a point where they're going to ask for same-sex marriage. It will promote homosexuality, likewise, like the government stated. So that's one side of it. How it's going to affect, it's going to, one, is by it will stop countries who might want to join and sign up for it. And two, countries like Bulgaria, countries like Poland, because Poland is the other one who's been talking about withdrawing. So Turkey and Poland started around the same time, the discussion to withdraw from the convention. So now it will hinder the global efforts and combat against violence against women and girls and that global accountability. Now, what Turkey declared with this withdrawal is actually that we don't want to protect women. We don't want to hold perpetrators to account. We as a government or a state, we're not to be held accountable. This is our way of where women stands. And we know where women stands, unfortunately, in the eyes of the Turkish state. So it's a very reactionary move, and it will have a big impact on the global efforts and the combat against this violence against women and girls.
Yeah. And how can we as young people educate ourselves and really learn about these stuff that are happening towards women and other serious issues, would you say?
So that's a really good question. I mean, healthy relationships education I spoke about around the convention, one of the requirements of the convention. So yeah, as much as UK hasn't ratified it, there has been some efforts along. So UK's reason for not ratifying it, they said we want to make sure we put everything in place first before we ratify, which personally I think you don't need to do that. You can ratify, be accountable, because that's kind of just like saving your back. If I do something wrong, then I won't be held accountable by the international human rights regulations. So that's their kind of way of keeping their back safe. But on the other side, on the other hand, although the resources are very limited, they're not putting too much money. We need about 10 times more of the budget they put into domestic violence and violence against women and girls, because it is the highest crime type in the country. So those things aside, there are healthy relationship programs and stuff. We as Image, we've run some of them in partnership with our consortium partners. We're in a consortium. So for young people's self kind of efforts in that, I think one for younger generation, I mean, that's the thing makes me very hopeful. And in everything we do, we always say we owe it to the next generation of young women and girls. We owe it to all of you, and you will then take the flag from us, and hopefully you will be at a point where you don't have to fight as hard as we have to, because things might have slightly changed. But in the meanwhile, I think it's opening that conversation, it's being able to kind of put things in practice and have those conversations, but not only amongst girls or amongst young women, but amongst the whole community, whole society. Like I said, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls is everyone's business. And unless we change this narrative, this structural narrative, it will remain. It will remain. And the lack of resources, we are doing these healthy relationship programs, for instance. How many of those can we do with the limited resources we have? It's very limited. So it's about young women like yourself to actually champion on these things, to actually carry the voice of the young women, and to be able to raise that awareness in identifying what a healthy relationship look like, and try to because I think if we try to identify those indicators at the onset as to what is unhealthy, because there are certain things that might be culturally in our community has been normalized so much. We as young women, we just normalize that. We don't see that maybe as a signal to a potential abusive behavior in the long term. So these conversations needs to take amongst young women and young men. We need to change this narrative, and young people play a huge role in changing narratives in these kind of violent, or in these kind of contexts. When you look at things like even Black Lives Matter, it's the young people who's leading that force, because everything that's done today, it's for your futures for tomorrow. So that's why young people play a very key role in kind of bringing about the change, and they play a big role in passing this message on to say, this is wrong. We should be able to say, no, this is wrong. We are free beings. We have exactly the same human rights as our male counterparts. So we need to claim. It's always like, as we say with many things, unfortunately, things are not served or given. You have to fight for it and claim it. So it's about, are the streets unsafe? We claim the streets. You got to make it safe. So it's that being the voice, having that voice and saying, you need to make a change. It's a structural issue, so it requires a structural change. It's a system issue, so it needs a systematic change.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. I think we, as young people, have become quite blind to the red flags of negative and bad relationships and to all these signs. And it's, like you said, it's very important to be educated for the future and to change. Yeah.
And it's very right. That's the terminology we use as well. It's red flags. Your boyfriend being jealous of you doesn't mean he loves you. We shouldn't cherish it. Or if your boyfriend is not jealous of you, we should not think he doesn't like me, because that is the correct behavior. Jealousy is one of the most dangerous. So when we look at the homicides, women's homicides from their ex or current partners, most of the time, if not, it's very high number. It's very jealousy related. So jealousy is one of the worst behavior traits, and it's actually the biggest indicator. It's the first red flag that will come our way. So it's being able to, like you said, being able to pick up on those red flags, and peer education, young women like you who's more aware around those things, to make others more aware. And like I said, so there's this thing about women's issue. No, there isn't a women's issue. There is a women's struggle against a patriarchal system issue, male dominant system issue. The issue lies with them. The issue doesn't lie with us. We're battling against it. So that's where the differences are. And it's about knowing how strong we are. All these things women go through, women are one of the most strongest creatures in this world, So we need to know our strength. We need to kind of be able to say physical power of a male, like male's physical bodily power, doesn't make them stronger than us. We really need to kind of regain that confidence and reclaim that confidence. And women are the creators of life. So that's where the strength lies,
Yeah. Thank you so much for teaching us and really informing us about what's going on and what we can do to take action and to educate ourselves. So next, there's Jem Errol to talk about the rights to protest.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you for having me. And if you need anything from Image as the young youth, we have teams who deliver healthy relationship programs and stuff. We're more than happy to kind of support you around those things as well, or champion anything.
Thank you very much.
You have a lovely night. Bye-bye.
You too.
Hi everyone, I'm Jem Errol, today joined by Shabir Lakha, editor of Counterfire. We're going to talk a little bit about a piece of legislation that's called the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. It's a mammoth piece of legislation which includes government proposals on crime and justice in England and Wales. It's currently being debated in House of Lords. I think it's passed through Parliament. Shabir, do you mind just telling us a little bit about what this bill is and how does it affect our sort of right to protest?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, it's a massive bill. I think it's something like 300 and something pages long. There's a lot of proposals within it, a lot of things that the Tory government want to pass. And yes, it's passed through its second reading of the House of Commons, although there are indications that it's going to be delayed. I mean, initially the Tories were trying to get it rushed through Parliament very quickly. And the reason why it's such a cause of concern, particularly on the right to protest, is that there are a number of things which it sets out, which give the police expanded powers to stop us being able to protest, essentially. These include insisting that protest organizers have to give a start and finish time. It would effectively mean a ban on one-man protests. They would essentially create a protest-free zone around Parliament. And basically, they say that protests can be stopped by the police, can be not be given permission or stopped after the fact by the police if they cause serious annoyance or nuisance to anyone,
Right.
whether that's a business or a person or whatever.
So that is a really key change in powers, I suppose, because previously the police, I suppose, they had to prove that there's a serious risk of harm to the public or property, whereas now it's just becoming a nuisance. So
exactly. Which is it's such a vague term. What's a nuisance, to who? I mean, if we're protesting outside Parliament, the whole purpose of protesting is to make our voices heard, right? But I'm sure that'll cause a nuisance to some MPs, as it's supposed to. So it's effectively a massive clampdown on our right to protest, and that it's very dangerous.
So they're going to have increased powers in terms of they can restrict the start and finish times of protests. I saw some information around noise. They set the noise limit to how much noisy a protest can be. And like you said, it can be a rule that applies to just one person. So you can pretty much just be arrested for, standing somewhere. It extends it to public spaces as well. So previously, is that?
Yes, no, exactly. Yeah. So anywhere in the public, the police have the right to firstly withdraw you to say that you don't have permission to protest. And if you go ahead, then to arrest you. And I think this is part of the reason why we've seen such outrage against this bill and such a necessity to stand up and defend the right to protest.
Yeah, and I feel like at the Sarah Everard vigil, there was a lot of attention has been drawn to the bill since that, because we saw a real aggressive clampdown on sort of people sort of gathering, expressing their freedom right to protest. Is this the kind of bill, are we gonna see more of incidences like this in the future if this kind of legislation does come in?
I mean, well, yes, exactly. To be honest, it was a very stupid move on the part of, Priti Patel, who we now know told the police to break up that vigil. For them to do this, because until then there hadn't been much attention paid to this bill going through Parliament. People weren't really aware of it. But what people saw in Clapham really shocked people, and it made people realize that if this is the way the police behave now, before this law is passed, then you can imagine how they'd behave afterwards. And right now they're using the guise of COVID regulations, despite there being provisions made about the right to protest, despite organizers trying to make sure things were socially distanced, and the initial organizers tried to negotiate with the police to make sure it could be done safely, and we've seen that it's been done safely in the past. But they made this political decision to come down and disperse people in a violent and aggressive way, to endanger people, really. And I think if this bill goes ahead, this is exactly the kind of thing we're going to see happening.
Yeah, and I think we saw during the Black Lives Matter protests that sort of erupted out of what happened there. We've seen, and I guess social media has really helped this in terms of we're seeing many incidences. It's not just in the UK, across the world, where police, we know, do abuse their powers. What kind of dangers is this going to set in terms of increasing the powers that they already have and being so vague in the terminology in terms of who can be arrested and what's classified as being a sort of nuisance? What kind of dangers are we sort of looking at if police do get these increased powers?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing to I think is worth commenting on is that the role of the police historically has been one of defending the state against working people. And we've seen from time and time again, whether it was Peterloo or Hillsborough or, or even protests in recent years against, the miners' strikes, whatever, the poll tax rights, police have attacked people when they're protesting. That's kind of a de facto part of their role. So I don't think it's particularly surprising to see the police behaving in this way. But I think what this bill points to is a legal authorization to stop protest entirely. And I think it's very deliberately being done at this moment where, because of the pandemic, because of the health crisis, because of the economic crisis, we are entering into, or already are in a period of kind of intensified struggle, and more people are taking to the streets, are, striking in their workplaces, having picket lines and protests and the rest of it. And so for the Tories to try and do this at this moment, I think is a deliberate attempt to try and kind of nip this dissent in the bud, as it were, and to try and stop people from being able to hold them to account for what they've done, this last year and longer. So I think that's the real danger, is that they try, like what we saw with Clapham was that, 1,000 people still turned out to Clapham Common for that vigil. But the original organizers were threatened with £10,000 fines each if they entered the vicinity. And so they actually cancelled the vigil, but people still came out. And I think that's what the police want to do. They want to instill this fear and this legal backing to instill this fear, to make people scared to protest in the first place. I think our history shows us that people will still protest, and I think people in Bristol this week have shown that. But they want to stop people trying to do it in the first place, and that's really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and make it a lot more difficult and a lot more risk. So I saw something that one of the legislation is 10 years imprisonment for damaging the statues. That
yeah, exactly.
That's actually longer than what you see sometimes. I saw in Parliament this was being debated. Some rape cases don't get prison sentences for that long, so it is quite shocking what is being proposed as part of this legislation. So the bill initially, Labour, am I right in understanding, abstained, and then following the public outcry, they sort of decided to oppose. Is that something? Are they taking advantage of just public outrage at the moment, or is this something that they're strongly opposed to at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, they abstained on the first reading, and they only voted against after the Clapham Common vigil. I don't think they're strongly opposed to it. I think that they've abstained or been in favour of the Spy Cops bill, which is also going through Parliament, as well as the Overseas Operations bill. So Keir Starmer, former Director of Public Prosecutions, is very much in favour of more police powers. He's very much distanced himself from the movements and attacked the left and trade unions during his time as leader of the Labour Party. So I have no doubt that this was an entirely opportunistic move on his part. But I think it shows you the power of protest. I think people have been have been fighting the good fight within the Labour Party to try and win positions and hold his leadership to account. But I think it shows you that the power that the extra parliamentary movement has on influencing policy even within the Labour Party. And I think it's a lesson to the left that we need to keep fighting on the streets to win this change.
Yeah, and I suppose there's we look back at protests where sort of trade unionists, the suffragettes, all of these movements that have got us into the better position that we're in at the moment. But under this piece of legislation, a lot of those individuals, a lot of those movements would actually be prosecuted, I suppose, because I saw the mayor of Bristol saying, the protests ain't reflective, but really these movements did cause a nuisance to the public because they're trying to get public attention. They're trying to show a bit of outrage so we can actually change the law. But so there's a bit of irony in that as well.
No, exactly. And I think what Marvin Rees said was the mayor of Bristol was especially ridiculous because he particularly named the Chartists and the suffragettes who took violent direct action against the police and against politicians, and who were arrested and prosecuted for it. But who did that, and for him to then say, what happened in Bristol was not a reflection of that was, I think, particularly ridiculous.
How does this bill affect young people? We spoke about that young people are sort of facing a student debt crisis, house prices are sort of the rents, extortionate rents. So we've seen a lot of strikes from young people. The economy is in crisis at the moment. There's a lot of unemployment. I suppose now they're going to be restricted if this bill goes ahead and how they express themselves. What's the implications of this bill on young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about young people, and I'll use this term quite loosely, in who counts as young people, but I think it's young people today in general are among the most politicized for generations. I mean, they've lived through at least 2 financial crises. We've, been through the experience for some of the older of the young people of, the Iraq War and the mobilizations against it. In the last 20 years, we've had the strength of the Palestine solidarity movement, etc. We've had in the last 5 years the experience of Jeremy Corbyn and that political moment. So I think we have one of the most politicized younger generations in a long time. One of the biggest movements to erupt in the UK over the last few years has been that of school students striking from school against climate change and taking to the streets in their thousands across the country in a kind of internationally coordinated way as well. So I think this will directly try and stop young people from being able to have their say and to fight for change. And I think especially in this last year during this pandemic, what we've seen is that because of the health crisis, it has been mainly young people who've been able to protest in the first place. So, whether it was Black Lives Matter or even these recent vigils for Sarah Everard and the protests against the bill have been predominantly young people. I think it's fair for young people to see this as a direct attack on them as well as the kind of general attack on our rights to protest. And I think young people are going to have an extra job of work to fight against this bill to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and is the media as outraged as they should be? Because sometimes what you see on social media platforms where a lot of people are, especially young people, are very engaged to what you watch on sort of the mainstream media, it doesn't seem to be very reflective of how the young people that we're talking about are sort of feeling. Do you think the mainstream media is as outraged as they should be with some of the piece of legislation that's being proposed?
Yeah, I mean, not at all. I think the kind of one watershed moment was the Clapham Common Vigil itself, where even I think reporters were shocked at the way, the scenes they saw of police kind of flinging women to the ground and trampling over the flowers and, all the rest of the things that they were doing. And I think that was the kind of one moment where even the media were like, hold on, this is too much. What's going on? And in a sense, they tried to reflect the anger of the people there. But you can see that switch very quickly when it came to, for example, the protests in Bristol, which was a similar situation where, it was peaceful protesters who gathered, did their thing, were largely about to leave, were attacked by the police, but they didn't take it. They didn't take it sitting down. They fought back. And for that, they were completely demonized. And, the media completely turned on them. These are violent rioters. Maybe the police should have expanded powers for dealing with these kind of people, stuff like that. So yeah, I think the media has always been a mouthpiece of the establishment. And I think, sometimes they try and reflect what's going on the ground because they don't have any other choice, as we saw with Clapham, but more often than not, it's the kind of reporting we saw after Bristol.
I think, I can't remember if it was David Davis, but when they were debating the bill in Parliament, one of the references was because during Extinction Rebellion protests, there was they blocked some of the media outlets. I think it was for the Mirror, the Sun, and they were saying that's a attack on our freedom of press. But then when you start to look at how free the press is, I think you just have like a handful of billionaires that I think, control around 80% of our media outlets. So our media doesn't really feel very reflective and democratic. And how do you get freedom of expression if you don't have a wide school of thought, basically, in that expression? So yeah, that's very interesting. What's next at the moment, Shabir? How do we fight it?
So there are still protests being organized around the country. I know there's the protest in Bristol this weekend, there's a protest in Manchester this weekend, and various other places. I mean, I think the best way to defend our right to protest is to keep protesting. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean specifically on, coming out to protest against this bill. It just means protesting in general. I think every protest from now is going to be a stand against the police and against this legislation and against the Tories. So, for example, in June, the People's Assembly have called a national demonstration once it should be, COVID restrictions should be lowered and we're out of lockdown and it should be safer. That's going to be, I think, a really big focal point for us taking a stand against these, draconian measures. And I mean, I think, as with every campaign, I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of petitioning the government, in terms of lobbying MPs, writing letters to MPs, building awareness and stuff on social media and the rest of it. But I think ultimately we are going to have to stay defiant on the streets. And I think that also means that we have to understand, because I was a bit shocked with some of the people who were quick to condemn the protesters in Bristol, who had been, really positive about what happened in Clapham just a week, previously. And I think, when you're taking a stand against the police, when you're facing repression and violence from the state, you can't judge the people in that situation in that way, and you can't, come out with these sweeping statements. So, I think we need to expect stuff like that, and I think we need to ultimately defend our rights to protest.
Yeah, I think that's really well summarized, Shabir. Thank you very much for your time, Shabir. Thanks for running through everything that we've sort of discussed today. Is there anything else that you might want to add, Shabir?
No, not at all. Just thanks for having me and keep up the great work. And yeah.
Thank you, Shabir. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Nice.